He divorced his loyal wife for a socialite. Now she owns the company that made him rich. Before we begin, may I ask you for a small favor? Please like, subscribe, and stay until the end. Your support helps our channel grow and keeps more emotional stories like this coming. Thank you for watching. He introduced her replacement before he had the courage to introduce the divorce. Neria Caldwell stood near the glass wall of the 47th floor ballroom, the lights of Manhattan burning behind her like a city that had already chosen sides. Below, yellow cabs moved along Madison Avenue in thin gold lines, and inside, the anniversary gala of Voss Meridian glowed with white orchids, champagne flutes, and people who knew how to smile while measuring power. Neria wore a midnight blue dress, simple at first glance, expensive only to someone who understood tailoring. Her wedding ring caught the chandelier light each time she moved her hand, a small diamond flashing like a witness no one had called to the stand. Across the room, Callahan Voss stepped onto the low stage with the ease of a man who had grown used to applause arriving before he deserved it. He was handsome in the polished way magazines loved. Dark blonde hair brushed back, black tuxedo cut to his body, mouth curved into the kind of confident smile that made investors feel chosen. 12 years ago, that smile had belonged to the man who asked Neria to read his first proposal on a kitchen table in Queens. Tonight, it belonged to the man who no longer looked for her in the crowd. Voss Meridian was built on vision, Callahan said, lifting his glass as the room quieted. But the future requires a different kind of presence. Neria felt the sentence before she understood it. A soft shift moved through the guests. Heads turned toward the stage steps, where Briar Langford waited in a pale silk gown, blonde hair pinned loosely, diamonds at her ears, the kind of woman society pages described as effortless because no one printed the cost. Callahan extended his hand to her. Tonight, I am proud to introduce the woman who understands where this company is going next. Applause rose, clean and immediate. Briar smiled as she joined him, placing her hand lightly on his arm, not like an employee, not like a consultant, but like someone already taught where to stand. Neria remained still. No one had announced her absence, but the room felt it being arranged around her. Near the bar, two board members stopped speaking. An assistant who had once brought Neria crisis reports at midnight looked down at her shoes. Callahan did not look at his wife until the applause began to fade. When his eyes finally found hers, they held no apology, only calculation, as if he were checking whether she would make the evening difficult. She did not. That had always been the mistake men like Callahan made. They saw restraint and called it weakness because it let them sleep. 20 minutes later, he found her in a private service corridor behind the ballroom, where the music sounded muffled and the smell of lilies from the gala flowers mixed with floor polish. He closed the door with one hand and held a cream folder in the other. "This is not how I wanted tonight to feel," he said. Neria looked at the folder before she looked at him. "Then why did you write it this way?" His jaw tightened. For a second, the practiced face slipped. Then the executive returned. He spoke about growth, image, incompatibility, the pressure of public life, and how their paths had become too different to keep pretending. Every word was dressed well. Every word was poor. "Briar represents the future," he said at last, softer, as if softness could make humiliation more tasteful. Neria heard the ballroom applaud again through the wall. She thought of all the nights she had protected that future before it had a logo, before it had investors, before it had a corner office with his name on the door. Callahan placed the folder on a narrow console table between them. Divorce papers. Prepared, printed, waiting for her signature like a decision she had been invited to witness but not make. Neria did not touch them. She only removed her wedding ring slowly and set it beside the folder, the sound small against the marble, almost delicate. Callahan watched her hand as if he expected tears to follow. None came. She lifted her eyes to his, calm enough to frighten a wiser man. "You just introduced the future of your company," she said. "I hope you remember who built its past." Then she opened the corridor door and walked back toward the light, leaving him alone with the papers, the applause, and a ring that suddenly looked heavier than the empire he thought was his. 12 years earlier, before Voss Meridian had a glass tower, a boardroom, or a logo polished enough to belong on the side of a Manhattan building, it lived on a scratched kitchen table in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. The radiator hissed too loudly in winter, The window frame leaked during heavy rain, and the only view was a brick wall across a narrow alley where someone kept a line of potted basil on a fire escape. Neria Caldwell loved that apartment because nothing in it pretended to be more than it was. A lamp with a crooked shade, 2 mugs that did not match, a printer that jammed whenever Callahan Voss needed documents most. And every night, after her shift as an executive assistant at a midtown investment firm, Neria came home, took off her heels by the door, tied her hair back, and became the quiet engine behind a company the world would one day call his genius. Callahan had ambition then, raw and bright, the kind that filled small rooms and made them feel larger. He paced while he spoke, ideas spilling out faster than he could organize them, hands moving through the air as if he could already see the future taking shape. But ideas were not contracts. Vision was not cash flow. Confidence was not a term sheet. Neria knew that because she spent her days watching powerful men lose millions over commas, clauses, and the small print they were too proud to read. So she read for him. She read every proposal, every investor deck, every partnership draft, every lease option for offices they could not yet afford. She crossed out weak language with a red pen, rewrote entire pages in the margins, and built spreadsheets that told the truth when Callahan's excitement tried to decorate the numbers. On the night before his first real investor meeting, he almost canceled. He stood beside the kitchen sink at 2 a.m, shirt wrinkled, eyes tired, voice low with the fear he never showed anyone else. "They are going to see I do not belong in that room," he said. Neria looked up from the deck she had been revising for 6 hours. The city outside was quiet except for a siren several blocks away. She slid the papers toward him and tapped the first page. "Then walk in like the room has been waiting for you." He stared at her, and for a moment the future softened into something human. The next day, he got the money. Not all of it, not enough to make him rich, but enough to keep the company alive. When he came home, he lifted Neria off the floor and laughed into her shoulder, saying she was the reason they believed him. For a few years, he remembered. He introduced her to early hires as the person who saw risk before it had a name. He brought her coffee at midnight when they worked side by side. He called her his first investor, even though all she had given him was time, judgment, and the part of herself that never appeared on a cap table. Then the offices grew. The checks grew. The photographs grew. Callahan's name began appearing in business magazines, always beside words like visionary, disruptor, founder. Neria clipped none of them. She only noticed how often the interviews used I where the truth required we. At first, it was a small omission. Later, it became the architecture of his fame. And slowly, the woman who had taught him how to enter the room was asked to stand farther and farther from the door. By the time the divorce papers were filed in New York County, Briar Langford already knew where the good light fell in Neria's old office. That was the detail Neria noticed first when she returned to Voss Meridian 2 weeks after the gala to collect the last of her personal things. Not the new flowers on the reception desk, not the assistant who stood too quickly when she saw her, not the way conversations softened as she walked across the marble lobby. It was the light. For 7 years, Neria's office had faced east, and every morning the sun came between the buildings just long enough to turn the glass wall gold. She used to arrive before anyone else, set her coffee on the left side of the desk, open the overnight risk reports, and let that first blade of light touch the papers before the day became a series of emergencies. Now the office door stood open, and inside, Briar had placed a pale velvet sofa where Neria's file cabinets used to be. The wall that once held market maps and acquisition timelines had been covered with framed black and white photographs from charity events. A crystal tray sat on the desk. White peonies filled a vase tall enough to block the view of the city. Briar stood near the window, speaking to an interior consultant about making the room feel less operational and more aspirational. Neria paused at the threshold with a small cardboard box in her hands. No one had told her the office had been reassigned. No one needed to. Erasure rarely sent an invitation. Briar turned and smiled with the delicate uncertainty of someone who had been told to be gracious but not generous. "Neria," she said, as if they were old acquaintances meeting at a luncheon. "I hope this is not awkward." Neria looked past her at the desk. Her desk. The same desk where she had once corrected the loan covenant that saved Callahan from losing his first expansion round. The same desk where she had taken calls from London at 4 in the morning while Callahan slept before a keynote. The same desk where employees came when they needed decisions made quickly and quietly, before the founder arrived to be brilliant in public. "It is an office," Nereus said. "It has survived worse things than redecorating." Briar's smile tightened. She was beautiful, polished, and young enough to believe discomfort was the same thing as being wronged. Callahan thought a fresh direction would help morale. Behind her, two junior executives pretended not to listen from the hallway. Nereus stepped inside and placed the cardboard box on a side table that had not yet been removed. Her belongings had already been gathered into neat piles by someone else. A framed photograph from the Queen's apartment, a worn fountain pen, 3 notebooks, a ceramic paperweight shaped like a crescent moon, and a stack of strategy binders with her sticky notes, still visible along the edges. She opened the top binder and saw the quarterly investor briefing she had written months before, now retitled under Callahan's name. Her initials had been removed from the footer, but her sentences remained. Clean theft always kept the parts that worked. Callahan entered as she closed the binder. He wore a navy suit and the expression of a man prepared to manage a scene. "Nerea," he said quietly, "I did not realize you were coming today." She lifted the box. "My things were here." His eyes moved to the binder in her hand. "Those are company materials." "I know. I wrote them." The hallway seemed to stop breathing. Briar looked at Callahan, waiting for him to correct the air. He did not. Not because he could not lie, but because too many people in that corridor had watched Nerea build the truth. "The transition will be easier if we keep boundaries clear," he said at last. Nerea studied the man who had once called her his first investor and now spoke to her like a former vendor. She could have reminded him of every contract, every saved account, every investor he had won with language she had written. Instead, she placed the binder back on the desk and picked up only the cardboard box. Her restraint was not mercy. It was memory taking notes. As she walked out, the oldest receptionist in the company lowered her eyes, and Nerea heard Briar behind her ask whether the peonies should be replaced with orchids. At the elevator, Nerea glanced into the box and saw one document she had not expected to find. A copied founder agreement from the company's first year, folded inside the back cover of her oldest notebook. She did not open it there. She only rested her hand on it as the elevator doors closed, feeling the thin edge of paper beneath her palm like a key no one remembered giving her. That night, Nerea did not go back to the apartment she had taken after the divorce and opened the founder agreement like a woman searching for revenge. She placed the cardboard box on her kitchen table, took off her coat, washed her hands, and made tea first. The small apartment in Brooklyn was quiet, with rain tapping lightly against the window and the hum of the refrigerator filling the spaces where a marriage used to be. It had no view of Manhattan, no private elevator, no marble foyer, but it had something the glass tower never gave her after Callahan became famous. It had air she could breathe without asking permission. Only when the kettle clicked off did she sit beneath the warm light and unfold the copied agreement from the back of her old notebook. The paper had softened at the creases, but the language remained sharp. Founding advisory interest, dilution protection, right of first refusal, emergency buy-in trigger upon wrongful exclusion or material governance breach. Nerea read each clause slowly, not because she had forgotten them, but because she remembered exactly how they got there. 12 years earlier, Callahan had been too impatient to care about protections. He had called the agreement paperwork. Nerea had called it survival. Their first attorney, Elias Whitcomb, had been the one to insist that her contribution be recognized, even if Callahan did not yet understand how much of the company depended on work that did not fit neatly into a founder title. Callahan had signed because he trusted her then, or because he was too focused on raising money to argue. Either way, his signature rested at the bottom of the page like a ghost that had waited patiently to be useful. Nerea did not smile. She thought of Briar standing in her office, asking whether peonies should become orchids. She thought of Callahan calling theft a transition and boundaries a kindness. Then she placed the agreement beside the divorce papers and saw the shape of his mistake. He had taken her name off presentations, pushed her out of rooms, replaced her public presence, and treated the company as if gratitude were optional. But he had never checked the foundation beneath his own empire. Over the next several weeks, Nerea did not announce herself. She built a new life with the same discipline she had once used to build his. Her mornings began before sunrise in a modest shared office near Dumbo, where the East River turned silver beneath the Manhattan Bridge and coffee came in paper cups instead of porcelain. She took restructuring clients no one glamorous wanted, a family logistics company buried under bad debt, a medical billing firm near collapse, a small software vendor whose founder could not read his own balance sheet without flinching. Neria listened, corrected, negotiated, and found value where panic had made others careless. Word spread quietly, not through magazines, through attorneys, lenders, and exhausted owners who learned that when Neria Caldwell entered a room, chaos began sorting itself into columns. At night, she studied distressed debt markets, shareholder remedies, conversion rights, and the private language of control. She did not chase Callahan. She did not watch Breyer's interviews. She only kept a folder labeled Voss Meridian and added to it whenever public filings, investor notes, or credit alerts crossed her desk. The folder grew thicker. The company that had once erased her was beginning to bleed in places only someone like her would notice. And when Elias Whitcomb finally called one cold March morning and said, "Neria, I think it is time you and I review the old agreement," she looked at the folder on her desk, touched the edge of the page with Callahan's signature, and answered with the calm of a woman who had waited long enough for the truth to become useful. By spring, the cracks inside Voss Meridian had stopped being private. They appeared first in places Callahan could explain away: a delayed product launch, a lender asking sharper questions, 2 senior analysts leaving within the same week. Then the cracks widened into numbers even confidence could not soften. A West Coast expansion deal stalled after the risk terms came back worse than expected. A major institutional investor paused its renewal. A credit facility that Callahan had once called routine began carrying language that made the board's attorneys sit straighter. From the outside, the company still looked untouchable. Its lobby still smelled of polished stone and expensive flowers. Its website still showed Callahan smiling beside words like innovation, trust, and next-generation finance. Breyer Langford still appeared beside him at benefit dinners, her hand resting lightly on his arm as cameras flashed. But inside the tower, people had started speaking more quietly. Assistants no longer laughed near the elevators. Finance meetings ran long behind closed doors. The glass conference rooms on the 42nd floor filled with men and women staring at spreadsheets, as if silence might make the red numbers turn black. Callahan noticed, but pride translated fear into irritation. When the chief financial officer suggested bringing in an outside restructuring advisor, Callahan looked at him for a long second and said, "We are not distressed." The chief financial officer did not argue. He simply closed the folder in front of him, and the sound was soft enough to be respectful, heavy enough to be remembered. Breyer tried to help in the only language she knew. She proposed a visibility campaign, a leadership luncheon, a magazine profile about resilience, a charity partnership with a museum board where her family name still opened doors. Callahan listened because it was easier than admitting the company did not need better lighting. It needed the woman who used to find the hidden cost before anyone else saw the invoice. One Friday evening, after the staff had thinned and Manhattan had turned blue beyond the glass, Callahan stood alone in his office with the investor dashboard glowing on the screen. The numbers looked almost familiar, and that made them worse. He had seen this pattern years ago, in the Queen's apartment, when a deal nearly collapsed because a covenant buried in paragraph 17 would have forced repayment early if revenue slipped below a narrow threshold. He had missed it. Neria had not. She had circled the clause in red, rewritten the financing structure, and saved the company before it had enough money to survive a mistake. Now paragraph 17 had returned in another form, and the woman who knew how to read it was gone. He reached for his phone and opened Neria's contact. Her name sat there without a photograph because he had deleted the old one after the divorce, as if removing her face could make memory easier to manage. His thumb hovered over the call button. Then Breyer entered without knocking, carrying a tablet with mock-ups for the next investor event. "I think we should make the tone more optimistic," she said. Callahan turned the phone face down on his desk. "Tomorrow," he answered. But tomorrow did not soften anything. By Monday, a private credit fund had begun quietly buying portions of Voss Meridian's debt at a discount. By Wednesday, Elias Whitcomb had sent Neria a sealed packet outlining governance breaches, dilution irregularities, and the emergency buy-in trigger that Callahan had forgotten existed. Neria read it in her Dumbo office while morning light moved across the East River. She did not celebrate. She only placed the packet beside the old founder agreement and aligned the edges with 2 careful taps. The company was bleeding because Callahan had mistaken image for structure. Now structure was answering back. The sealed packet from Elias Whitcomb did not ask Neria to be angry. It asked her to be precise. She spent that morning in the Dumbo office with the blinds half open, the East River sliding silver beneath a low sky, and 3 stacks of paper arranged across her desk like evidence waiting to become action. The first stack held the old founder agreement with Callahan's signature at the bottom. The second held the credit documents Voss Meridian had amended after she left. The third held public filings, board notices, and investor disclosures that showed the same pattern in different language. Rights ignored, safeguards bypassed, control treated as something Callahan owned because people had stopped questioning him. Elias arrived just before noon, carrying a leather briefcase older than half the startup founders Neria now advised. His hair had gone white since the Queen's apartment days, but his eyes were still sharp behind thin-framed glasses. He did not waste time with sympathy. That was one of the reasons she trusted him. He sat across from her, opened the founder agreement, and placed 1 finger beneath the clause she had already read 6 times. This was never decorative, he said. Your advisory interest had protection. Your exclusion from governance, combined with the debt irregularities, activates the buy-in language if we move before they refinance. Neria looked at the page. Outside, a ferry cut through the gray water. Can it hold? Elias removed another document from his briefcase. If we structure it through a rescue fund and acquire the distressed debt first, yes. The board will have limited room to refuse. They need liquidity, and Callahan needs time. He will think the fund is saving him. Neria was quiet long enough for the office heater to click on. Saving him. The phrase landed strangely. She remembered Callahan at 28, standing over a broken printer with ink on his sleeve, laughing because they had mailed investor packets with slightly crooked labels. She remembered believing that building something together meant the thing would remember both hands. But companies did not remember. Contracts did. I do not want this built on spite, she said. Elias studied her over the glasses. Then do not build it on spite. Build it on ownership. That afternoon, Neria formed a rescue vehicle under a name no one at Voss Meridian would connect to her. Caldera Bridge Capital. The name was neutral, almost forgettable, which made it useful. Through attorneys and intermediaries, Caldera began purchasing Voss Meridian debt quietly, 1 portion at a time, from lenders eager to reduce exposure before the company's troubles became public. No press release announced it. No social media post hinted at it. While Callahan attended a rooftop donor dinner with Breyer and spoke about confidence in the next quarter, the pieces of his company were moving through accounts he never bothered to study closely enough. By the end of the second week, Caldera held enough leverage to propose a restructuring. The offer arrived at Voss Meridian on a Thursday morning, printed on thick white paper, written in the clean language of rescue. Immediate liquidity, covenant relief, operational stabilization, board oversight, convertible control rights upon default. Callahan read the first page in his office while Breyer stood near the window, choosing photos for an upcoming profile. This could buy us 6 months, the chief financial officer said. Callahan heard the relief in the man's voice and hated needing it. Who is behind? Caldera, he asked. A private restructuring group, the chief financial officer said. Their counsel checks out. Whitcomb is involved on the legal side. Callahan frowned at the name, recognizing it only as an old attorney from a life he had filed away. Pride told him to refuse. The dashboard told him he could not. He signed the preliminary acceptance just before sunset, his pen moving across the page with the careless authority of a man who still believed signatures only worked in his favor. Across the East River, Neria received the confirmation by email. She read it once, closed her laptop, and looked out at Manhattan rising beyond the water. She did not feel victorious. She felt the door of a room opening after years of being locked from the inside. The restructuring offer did exactly what Neria knew it would do. It gave Callahan enough oxygen to keep standing, but not enough room to run. For 3 weeks, Voss Meridian operated beneath the calm pressure of Caldera Bridge Capital's terms. Department heads received new reporting requirements. Finance teams uploaded weekly liquidity statements before sunrise every Monday. Legal counsel reviewed governance records that had not been opened since the company's early years. Callahan presented it all to employees as disciplined stabilization, his voice firm in the quarterly town hall, his shoulders square beneath the stage lights. "This partnership gives us flexibility," he said, while Breyer sat in the front row wearing a cream suit and a practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. Voss Meridian remains in control of its future. The room applauded because employees had mortgages, children, and private fears they did not bring to work. But control had already begun moving, quietly and legally, through documents Callahan had signed without understanding who waited behind them. Neria did not appear during those weeks. She let the name Caldera Bridge do what a name was supposed to do, stand between her and the noise. From her Dumbo office, she read every report. She saw which divisions were worth saving, which executives had been loyal to the company rather than to Callahan, and which deals had been dressed up. With confidence because no one wanted to admit the founder had stopped listening to caution. She saw Breyer's influence too, not in balance sheets directly, but in the soft waste around them. Inflated event budgets, branding consultants paid more than compliance analysts, investor dinners scheduled while product deadlines slipped. It was not corruption. It was vanity with invoices. Then came the default trigger. A missed covenant test, small enough for a press release to call technical, large enough for the agreement to do what Elias had designed it to do. The board called an emergency meeting for Friday at 8 in the morning on the 42nd floor. Callahan arrived early, wearing a dark suit and the expression of a man who had slept less than he wanted anyone to know. Breyer arrived with him, quieter than usual, her phone clutched in both hands. "Let me handle the room," she whispered near the elevator. Callahan looked at the closed boardroom doors. "This is not a room you can handle with charm." She said nothing after that. Inside, the directors sat with coffee they had not touched. The chief financial officer looked pale. Outside counsel arranged papers in careful stacks. At 8 exactly, Elias Whitcomb entered first. Callahan frowned, irritation rising to cover the first shape of fear. "Why is he here?" he asked the chair. Before anyone answered, the door opened again. Neria Caldwell stepped into the boardroom in a tailored black suit. Hair swept back from her face. No wedding ring, no visible anger, only the stillness of a woman who had already survived being underestimated. The room changed without a sound. A pen rolled off the table and clicked once against the floor. Breyer turned toward Callahan, suddenly understanding that the name he had dismissed from old paperwork had not stayed in the past. Callahan stood halfway, then stopped, one hand braced against the table. "Neria," he said, and for the first time in years, her name sounded less like something he owned and more like something he had failed to protect. She did not look at Breyer. She did not look at the portraits of Callahan shaking hands with governors and investors along the wall. She looked at the board chair and placed a slim folder on the table. "I am here on behalf of Caldera Bridge Capital," she said. "And as of this morning, I am here as the controlling party under the executed restructuring agreement." The sentence landed cleanly. No drama. No raised voice, just a fact sharp enough to divide the room into before and after. Elias Whitcomb did not raise his voice when he explained how Callahan had lost control. That made the moment worse. The boardroom was built for power, all glass walls, walnut panels, black leather chairs, and a long table that reflected the faces around it with almost cruel clarity. Outside, Manhattan moved through a pale morning haze, unaware that the company carrying Callahan's name had just shifted beneath his feet. Elias opened the restructuring agreement, then the founder agreement, then the notice of conversion rights, placing each document in front of the board chair with the calm hands of a man who had spent 40 years watching arrogance meet paperwork. "Caldera Bridge Capital acquired the qualifying debt," he said. "Voss Meridian triggered the covenant default last night. Under the executed terms, the control rights converted at 6 o'clock this morning. Combined with Miss Caldwell's protected founding interest and emergency buy-in rights, she now holds controlling authority pending the formal share registry update." The chief financial officer closed his eyes for 1 second. A director near the window whispered something to counsel. Breyer sat very still beside Callahan, her cream suit suddenly too bright for the room. Callahan looked from Elias to Neria, then down at the papers, as if the words might rearrange themselves out of loyalty. "This is absurd," he said, but the sentence had no weight. Absurdity did not come with signatures, timestamps, and legal seals. Neria remained standing at the far end of the table, her black suit sharp, her expression composed. The morning light caught the smooth plane of her cheek, the neat line of her collar, the absence of the ring he had once watched her set beside the divorce folder. He had expected bitterness if she ever returned. He had prepared for accusations, tears, maybe even a speech about everything she had done for him. He had not prepared for a woman who no longer needed him to admit the truth before acting on it. "You hid behind a fund," Callahan said, his voice lower now. "You let me sign with you without telling me." Neria looked at him then. "You signed documents you did not read carefully enough." "That was never one of my habits." The words landed softly, but several people at the table looked down. Everyone in that room knew the history, or enough of it. They remembered the years when Neria reviewed the dangerous clauses before Callahan entered meetings to receive praise. They remembered who caught the risks, who calmed investors, who stayed late when the founder left for interviews. Breyer's hand tightened around her phone. She looked at Callahan as if seeing, for the first time, the space between the image he sold and the structure he had inherited from someone else's work. The board chair cleared his throat. "Miss Caldwell, what are your immediate instructions?" Neria opened her folder and removed one page. No flourish, no triumph, just a decision that had already been measured. First, all discretionary branding and social spending is suspended pending review. Second, the audit committee will examine governance and disclosure failures from the last 18 months. Third, Mr. Voss will step back from executive authority during the review. The room did not gasp. It absorbed. Callahan's face changed by inches, the way a building changes when the first crack reaches the foundation. "You cannot remove me from my own company," he said. Neria placed the page on the table. "It was never only yours." Silence followed, full and exact. Somewhere beyond the glass, an elevator chimed. Breyer looked away. The board chair picked up the page, read the signature line, and nodded once to counsel. Neria had not taken the company with fury. She had taken it with the same precision she once used to save it. And that was what Callahan could not bear. Not that she had returned, but that the room believed her immediately. Callahan did not follow Neria immediately when the meeting ended. For several minutes, he remained in the boardroom after the directors filed out, after Breyer left without touching his arm, after the chief financial officer gathered the signed instructions and avoided looking at him with pity. The glass walls reflected him from every side. The founder, the visionary, the man whose name stood in silver letters above the lobby. But in those reflections, he looked smaller than the photographs on the wall. The board chair had used careful language. Temporary removal from executive authority. Independent review. Stabilization period. Yet every phrase meant the same thing. The company had stopped belonging to his voice. Outside the conference room, staff members moved quietly through the corridor, pretending not to notice that history had changed before lunch. Neria walked toward the elevators with Elias beside her, the slim folder under one arm, her steps unhurried. She did not look back at the boardroom. She did not need the final image of Callahan stunned behind glass. She had carried enough images of him already. Callahan in the Queen's kitchen with ink on his sleeve, Callahan laughing when the first investor check cleared, Callahan standing on a gala stage with Breyer beside him while his wife still wore his ring. At the elevator bank, Elias paused and touched the button. "You handled that cleanly," he said. Neria watched the numbers descend. "Clean does not mean painless." He nodded, understanding enough not to answer. The elevator opened, and before she could step inside, Callahan's voice came from behind her. "Neria." The corridor grew quieter, not because people stopped moving, but because everyone within earshot learned how to listen without turning their heads. She faced him slowly. His suit was still perfect, his hair still in place, his watch still catching the morning light, but the performance around him had loosened. For the first time in years, he looked like a man standing without a stage. "Was this worth it?" he asked. The question might have been anger. It might have been fear. It might have been the nearest thing to remorse his pride allowed. Neria held his gaze, and all the years between them settled in the polished hallway. The nights she worked while he slept, the contracts he signed without crediting her, the office Briar redecorated before the divorce felt cold, the ring left beside the folder on marble. "You think I came back to hurt you," she said. "I came back because you built an empire on the assumption that my silence would last forever." Callahan looked toward the glass doors of the boardroom, then back at her. "I made mistakes. You made decisions," Nereus said. The difference stood between them like a wall no apology could cross quickly. His mouth tightened. "You took my company." For the first time that morning, Nerea almost smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "No, Callahan. I took back what you built on my name without saying it." The elevator chimed again. Elias stepped inside first, giving her room. Down the hall, Briar stood near the reception area, pale and quiet, watching a world she had mistaken for glamour reveal its machinery. Nerea did not look at her with cruelty. Briar had not stolen Nerea's value. She had only accepted a room Callahan emptied for her. Nerea stepped into the elevator and turned around. Callahan remained in the corridor beneath the silver Voss Meridian sign, surrounded by glass, money, and the kind of silence that arrives after applause realizes it was wrong. As the doors began to close, Nerea saw him lower his eyes to the floor, not defeated by her anger, but by the accuracy of what she had become. Outside, Manhattan kept moving. By evening, temporary notices would go out. By morning, the company would begin removing vanity from its budget and memory from its walls. Nerea would not rename the company out of spite. Not yet. She would rebuild what was worth saving and let the rest learn the cost of pretending she had never been there. She had not won him back. She had not needed to. She had walked into the room where he erased her and left as the woman no one could remove again.